everybody. Thanks for joining me today as we come to part 2 and conclude our series of the minor arcana and numerology. As you can see, we are discussing the 10 today. But first, I want to talk to you a little bit more about other meanings and symbolism of the X. Now, of course, we know the X in Roman numeral has to do with the number 10, but it's also called a quaternary, which basically means that it is a spiritual symbol that is quite active and dynamic. And I bring that to your attention because they're going to be that symbol in these cards, and we'll get a greater meaning of the symbology, because at the 10 level, as you now know, we are at a higher level. It is called perfection, completion on a perfection level. And of course, we ventured from card number 1 throughout the minor arcana, and at the 9 level, we said, okay, here I am. I completed it. That's all there is. There's only 9 digits, 9 steps. And then I need to graduate. I need to begin again. And in order to do that, I really have to know it. Integrated into my body, mind, and spirit. It has to be part of me now, where it is on automatic pilot per se. So part of that understanding is, of course, just in the symbolism of the X, and then you don't need to see my arms here. Here we go. We have this X. And we have a integration point where the two become one. So it becomes in our blood. We become part of it. Now, the X is also known as St. Andrew's Cross. Now, what is the meaning of St. Andrew's Cross? It means the union of the upper and lower worlds. Upper and lower worlds are united. We see St. Andrew's Cross in the tarot here on card number 2 of the Wands on the left column. Of course, at the tip of the cross, we are seeing lilies of pure thoughts and kind of these red flowers indicating the active principle, the principle of male, and of course the purity of the pure thoughts. So it is thought in process, and it unites the two worlds if we look at it from the standpoint that it represents St. Andrew's Cross. And we've seen it, you've seen it where it almost looks like a cross has been laid down on one of the horizontal lines. So you get that idea of there's a union of opposites. We also have that, of course, when we have a regular traditional cross, where the vertical line is always spirit and the horizontal line is matter, and in between where they're joined, there is union and something new is created. All right, so we understand that. Now, on another concept that I think it's important for me to bring to light here, again, it's almost like hidden symbology that you have to look for. There is the 0 that we discussed in the 10, the 1. The number 10 has a 1, and it has the cipher 0. And we also looked at that as the cosmic egg, the alpha, the omega, the all, and God. I want to look at that 0. If we can just think of it as a microcosmic sign. And by analogy, a microcosmic sign of a man or a woman, let's just say a human's head, and that is the top of the body, and that head really is responsible for reason, It's called the mind, thinking, evaluating, enlightenment, insight, inspiration, brilliance. It's connected to the sun, and the sun is the light giver. The sun, without the sun, there would be no life. So look at that as the head, as where it is the starting point in order for change. And as I said, when we go through these things, I will, through the cards, I will bring that out here shortly. Now, the other part of the equation here, when it comes to the physical aspect of man, and we know that the five-pointed star also indicates man, we can look at the arms of a human as the horizontal line, and the arms also have a right arm and a left arm, and a male and a female, and it is through our arms that we create harmony or we create strife. So through whatever we think, the thought then inspires us, and then we go about doing it, activating it through the facilities of our arms, our hands, and our five fingers. I want you to keep all that in mind. That is the rich symbology. So let me go ahead and just bring that before we start each individual card. I certainly want to bring this to your attention so that you see the hidden aspects of those symbols I've just talked about. I talked about the X. You have a crossing here. You have a crossing here. You could say that these are crosses. The tips of the swords here are crosses. We talked about the head. Well, out of all of these cards, we have heads that look away. Here we have the back of a head. The woman and the man, we see the back of the head. Here we have the back of the head, and here we have a man again, the back of a head. We also see profiles of the children and the wise man and the woman and the child. So the head, and what I've just talked about as being important, is also shown here in the symbology in the tens in the tarot. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's begin, of course, with the Ten of Wands. Now, this card's being that it's in the suit of wands is spiritual in nature. It's the element fire, and it often represents the self and our identity. Therefore, at this stage, spiritual lessons are completed. Spiritual fulfillment has been obtained. You've earned all the wands that you are now carrying. And these crossed wands indicate that you have oh my goodness, sorry folks. I don't want to do this all over again, but integrated the concepts and experiences of life, which may be in opposition with who you are, what you represent, and what you liked, but you accepted it, and you are now reached that 10 level, and there is no more growth because the wands are not in the ground, and you're ready to move forward. Now, isn't it interesting that as he's moving forward, the load that he is carrying is quite burdensome. That means that the lessons in our lives are not easy for us to take, to understand, and sometimes even to remember as we go forward. But the universe will kind of nudge us and say, do you remember that you agreed to this, or this is part of you now? And because of that knowledge, we seem to jump back or be able to obtain or perform the next thing quicker, much easier. It isn't as burdensome. I also want you to know that when you look at this card, you see that his hair is yellow. So you can see that he has, his head has been brightened. It has been enlightened. And if you look at his crossed arms, his one hand, the right hand, because it's looking away from us, it's not looking at us, so the right is the right and the left side is the left side, seems to be touching his forehead. And we know that that's where symbolically the third eye is, the pineal gland is. So he basically symbolically says, I really don't need to be looking with my visual eyes. I am going about blindsided but trusting that I'm going in the right direction. I also want to look at the colors. It's kind of like an orange and red. And orange is always the color of strength, perseverance, and courage. And we see the red and we know that he's passionate. He's going to move forward, even though his back is probably a little stiff and in pain. He has that impetus, that force to continue forward. Now we also have the color called Ursha, O-C-H-E-R. And it's a combination of yellow and green, but what it signifies is intellectual decision. And again, going back to the head, and he is walking on that. That intellectual decision was his foundation, and his leggings are on that, and he feels grounded with his brown boots. So that spiritual lesson has definitely been known, identified, understood, and because of that, he is now stable and grounded and is moving forward, as well as the purple, which is quite spiritual, and purple sometimes has to do with royalty, meaning he's reached a level of royalty through his endeavors. Of course, we know wands has to do with victory and what you've gained on the earth plane. So he's been called to a higher level, and he is now responding to that. So this card certainly is rich in symbology as he moves on now into the future. The future certainly is unknown. It's all in blue. It's unconscious. It doesn't matter. He's 100% pushing and going in that direction. All right, we now come to the Ten of Cups, and we have joy, harmony, peace through a happy marriage as well as family. Therefore, we also see a different kind of joy. This is shared joy. They're united. We're at that 10 level. We talked about the cross, and it's really different from the singularity of the joy and pleasures that we had at the 9 level, where we see one person, his hands are crossed as well, almost at the heart chakra. So there's like, I have all this, but I'm not really sharing it. And certainly there's a differentiation here where you now have an abundance of this love and joy that has come from above, and it is shared with other people, which is very important in our spiritual evolution. So the card shows attainment, expression of love for one another, also the possibility for happiness as one works with and through the ups and downs of emotions. Remember that it's never an easy walk to the 10 level, and certainly they would have had their differences, but right now they are united in the celebration of what has occurred. The 10 cups raised up in the sky kind of is reminding them, as they're looking at that, the value and importance in having a loving family, having relatives, and making that the most, elevating that's more important than other things. Love and joy is really a higher place than pleasures, accumulations that we see at the 9 level. That is another reason why you see the rainbow of hope. Remember, that was God's way of saying that the world was not going to be flooded anymore, was the rainbow. The rainbow also has the 7 spectrum of colors, and we can relate that to the chakras. And we can continue on, and we have an arc here, and we have an arc there, and anytime we have an arc, it's a transitory symbol, meaning that where you are now, once you walk under that arc, you are into the future, and there has been a transformation, a regeneration, and a new birth. So, also remember the gestation of the number 9, and that a fetus goes through 9 months. He is in the womb of the woman. When he is born, he leaves that environment and enters a brand new world and becomes one after one more cycle, as is at that age 1. So there is that rebirthing when we're at the level of the 10. So the other thing that I want to bring is that the cups above is the understanding of unity. I guess I want to say that once you have one, it multiplies itself, and they become like a domino effect when you come from the spiritual essence of sharing and giving, uniting, again, even though it's sometimes very, very uncomfortable. We see the union here of opposites, which I brought into the introduction with the cross and the X. And the woman and the man are united. And it's interesting because her right hand, which always represents male, is up, and his left hand, which represents woman, is up. So he has united his feminine side. She has united her masculine side. The children are dancing in joy. They're oblivious to the rainbow, which we know when we are mature and adults is a sign, a spiritual sign. They are just absorbing, if you will, the harmony and the love and the connection by expressing it in their bodies, which is dancing. They have formed a circle because their hands are united and have become one, an interlocking circle by joining hands with one another. And the opposite leg is also up as they're dancing, also indicating the integration of opposing forces. So the whole card speaks about unity, love, and again you have that complete blue background, which is once you go under that arc, there's more uncertainty, but you are empowered with the cycle and the stage that you are in, giving you the ability to know that you have all the tools you need to go forward in faith and continue on to that next level, whatever that is. We now come to a little bit different coloring and indication here. The 10 of Swords, thank God there's no more swords, right? Now this is the only card in the suit of swords where the body has been pierced. So what's going on? Well, let's begin with the suit element, which is air. Air is known as the element that represents the mind, reasoning, thinking, communications, our beliefs. We also know that the swords represent ambition, force, strife, and sometimes aggression. When we have a sword on our hands, we decide what we're going to do with that. We can strike or we can cut away the bad. So it's a choice. Again, it's a two-edged sword. So we see someone who, by all means, has reached bottom. But take note that his head, his face, is towards the horizon. The past is behind. The past is behind, and the energy you're being told is in front of you now. And of course, the head is where all this is taking place. So he's had a great deal on his mind, which we know with the 10 swords, which depict that. And to the point where he's unable and incapacitated. He is not going anywhere. He is face down. So we can say that the decisions that was made may have altered his life severely. And he needs to understand that the change that he brought upon himself, where he is now, may have been forced upon through his own doing. And he is reaping the consequences of his thoughts and actions, which is what the Wheel of Fortune is all about, that we spoke of in part 1. The consequences of your thoughts and your actions are very well shown and depicted in the 10 of Swords. So we see a red covering, and we see this red substance here from his right shoulder passing underneath his head and out through the right. And basically, we can say that it is representing blood because the swords are piercing him. So what's the symbology of blood? Well, there are many. Number one, the blood is the adrenal, where the adrenal hormone through the fight or flight happens. So the first thing that happens when we are in fear, we fight or we move away. So that could be that the blood carries the adrenals. Now, the blood is also the vehicle in which we know the constitution of the body. We go to the doctors and they take blood, and looking at the analysis of that blood, they know the condition of our body, because this card does depict the health of the body at times. Again, we're keeping in mind that all these cards are usually interpreted with surrounding cards, as well as where they are placed in the layout. So that's an important thing to remember about it. And we also know that the blood is very important, because if we are injured or wound, that is the agent that clogs the blood so that we don't hemorrhage and bleed to death. So there has been a crisis going on here. We can also look at this as we've done with the other suits of how the swords are divided up. And it's made very clearly here by Pamela Coleman Smith and Arthur Waite, when they decided to create this card, that they wanted 6 of the swords to be on the bottom part of his body, and also piercing the blood or the red aspect. And then the next one seemed to be on the upper part of the body, and there are 4 in total, and they are on the brown vest, let's say. So let's begin with the 6, and let's go back to what was going on in the 6 of Swords. And basically, we had someone who said, I'm going to make a move, and I'm going to start over somewhere else. And the card is showing you here that you have a right to do that. That may be a good idea, but that your problems are in front of you. They're not going to go away because there's a new environment, but they're there, um, and they need to be dealt with. And again, depending on surrounding cards, we can surmise that maybe they weren't dealt with at this point, and he's carried them now onward and now is made to deal with them. We can also look at the Four of Swords, and here the card was telling us, pause, rest your body, stop thinking, worrying, and in so doing, allow yourself to go into a different space, whether that is through meditation, contemplation, prayer, asking that through that you will be guided and work through that guidance, if you will, that spiritual understanding. Take it up, what was given to you, that yellow insight, put your hand down, take it, and proceed with this new knowledge, with this new thinking, maybe with this new belief system, maybe clearing out false beliefs or accusations, because those four, we can look at them symbolically through the chakra systems and really try to understand what was penetrating. We see that one of them is in his ear, so he hasn't listened to the inner voice or spirit. And we see one that is maybe in his throat, in his neck, and the throat is the sound of our voice, how we communicate. And were there harsh tones? Were there words that were cutting, hurtful, etc.? And we see another one through his backbone, where there is the connection between his two arms, his right arm and his left arm. What did you do with your arms when your thought was happening? How did you work your body? And then lastly, the fourth sword certainly seems to be going through his heart. Did you use your heart in what you created and how you spoke, and how you went about transferring all of that positive energy in your understanding, in your inner ears, in your inner knowing? So we get an idea that there definitely was a crisis, but that he is ready to heal. Number one, he has that yellowish white undershirt, and that is what is on his body. So he has now given up, and he is allowing for that inspiration of that color to touch him. He is laying on it. We also see that he's fixated on the blue valley of maybe not completely understanding the unknown or the unconscious, but above that, once he has risen above this, picked himself up again, he now sees the clearing and the darkness will dissipate. So we see that in his levels. Now, the other thing that is quite really important that this card shows that we are in the healing is his hand gesture. Sometimes it's known as a mudra, which is fortunate. This particular mudra is fortunate, but there's also what we just discussed earlier. We have a vertical line with his two fingers raised, and then he has his small finger and his thumb uniting, causing a horizontal line of the joining of opposites. We can also look at this hand gesture quite resembling that of card number 5, and that is the Hierophant. Now 5 is 5 is basically 1. 5 and 5 is 10. It is 1/2 of the 10. Here we have the Hierophant given a benediction, the same 2 fingers up, which represents God and man. And here he is blessing, let's say, the 2 initiates at his feet. They are also opposites because we have, again, the white lilies of purification or of thought, and then the negative part of our own desires, our 5 senses that we saw on St. Andrew's cross here on the column on the left. And again, everything is interrelated. So definitely this is a card of healing. The integration has happened, and all is well. We will survive. We now come to the 10 of Pentacles, and this is such a beautiful card, and it's rich in symbology. There's so much symbology here that I'm sure half of a book has been written about it. Okay, at the 10 of Pentacles, we see very simply that we have a multi-generational family, and we have 10 pentacles in the form of a tree of life, and that's something that we saw and discussed a little bit in part 1, because the 10 numbers are represented in the tree of life, and starting with 1, and we ended with 10. And again, referring back to part 1, I go through where these spheres, these sephiras, indicate the number 1 through 10 and their meaning behind it. Those are steps. Okay, and that we start from spirit and we go down from matter, and from matter we now work our way back up to spirit, and that is cyclical, as we saw in the Wheel of Fortune. Okay, going back to the 10 of Pentacles, there are indications of earthly matters worked quite respectively within a framework of your life here on earth. And the card shows the physical labor that you've done has not only been beneficial and secure for you, but it has been in such growth that you now have produced it, have enough for the next generation. And we know that as inheritance. So this is a very wealthy card. It's generational. It's passed down. It's property. It could be money. All of those good things. It could be wealth. It could also be a good gene pool where your physical body and your genes were quite healthy, and you're passing that down to the next generation. But as with all cards, there's a deeper meaning. There's a hidden aspect of that symbols, which we have to understand. Number 1, let's look at the old man sitting on the left side, the past. He's alone. And what seems to be, no one's paying attention to him. So what kind of person is this man? The grandfather, maybe the great-grandfather? Well, he has white hair, which indicate wisdom, and he also has a yellow beard, which means he's had spiritual growth, and he is evolved. He has integrated, and he has reaped the fruits of his labor, which is shown on his garment. His garment has many symbols, but we have grapes, we have vines, we have fertility, and prosperity showing from his cloth. But the key here is we can interpret that all this luxury, all this goodness, all this prosperity can sometimes come between you and, more importantly, the family, the wisdom. Sometimes the old are isolated or ignored, and we need to remember that in this card. It's also being depicted by the two gray dogs. You remember that gray is a neutral color, and it indicates the blending of opposites, black and white, and we get gray. They recognize divinity and they give it respect. The focus of the dogs are on the old man. Not only that, we also get where the animals, the dogs, the one hand, the right hand of the, let's call him the wise man, is on the nose, the head of the dog, the beginning part, okay? What we talked about earlier, the spiritual aspect. And isn't it interesting that the child, also known as the superconscious, I will talk about that here shortly, holds on to the tail, okay? The cyclical and the importance of beginnings and endings. And of course, he's ending and the child is just beginning. And we do start at the bottom in the cycles of life here in Malkut, also known as kingdom, as we work our way up spiritually on the tree of life. So there's, again, rich in symbology. All right, let's go to the man and woman. We have a man with his back turned to us, and the woman with her profile, not a direct view, just as the child looks away. But again, we have indicating opposites. The woman has a red garment. Now she is exactly under the archway. Again, hasn't transitioned to that new future. And she's looking at the man, so there's a little bit more for her to know, to learn, to see from the male. We also see a man with a blue, feminine, receptive on his left shoulder. And he holds on to the wand of the magician. Let's bring the magician out, card number 1. That is his power. And he basically holds it, but the wand is not in action. In fact, it's leaning on the archway. Look at the similarities of the wand here. You have the Yod, Y-O-D, which we discussed in video number 1, which has to do with the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it is called the first letter of the Tetragrammaton, having to do with the divine name of God. And it is at the tip of his wand like it is at the magician. We don't know the bottom of the part. The magician has both, and it is of the axiom, the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, bringing it down to earth here, and that is our beginning of our major cards. And then we have the child in blue, the super consciousness. So let me try to explain all that. We know that the threefold aspects of man is the conscious, represented by male, the unconscious, represented by female, and then the superconsciousness, represented by the child. And that's the symbology that we have here. The other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention very quickly before we wrap everything up is the coat of arms, which again is generational. We see that here on the archway. There's royalty, it has been established. And then we also see scales, and the scales very spiritually have to do with weighing of the soul versus material matter. And does one outweigh the other, or are they balanced out? And that really has all to do with what that card represents here. In the lessons as well as how the minor arcana, when we reach this higher octave of the 10 level, what it basically all means. Well, it represents that when we've reached this, hopefully we are now experiencing peace because we've overcome the opposition. When we conquered it basically by not defeating it, but basically by accepting it, molding in it to our consciousness. In doing so, we've formed harmony because now those opposites have been reconciled. There's been a union. So it's harmonic, and in the joining of two opposing forces, we have a greater awareness. And through that harmony, we exemplify or we emanate joy, which is contagious, and things that we do become joyful. Things that we touch resonate. Other people see it. And joy is healing. Joy regenerates us. Joy makes us feel like there's complete contentment because aspects of ourselves are more easily not only understood, but we realize that in the long run, they were the best thing we could have done. It's almost like facing our fears. And once we've conquered that fear, we are no longer fearful of it. It's not this dragging that we run away from. And there's so much freedom in not having that fear on our shoulders or over our heads. So I'm going to conclude it there. I hope everybody finds that this series was helpful to them. I welcome all your thoughts and comments. Oops, I'm sorry. I know I bumped that as I'm ready to go ahead and shut off the video. Thanks everyone for joining me. Blessings to all. Bye for now.